All right, welcome everybody. We're the Bevry community. We're here to host open collaboration and discussion over interesting ideas in philosophy, things like that. I'm John Buck. I'm joined here with Pleasure of Doubt, or Brett, and also Concept Hut. And we might get, go ahead and say something, Concept Hut. He's not on camera though.
Hello, people.
There you go. And Nick might come by later, or Tyler. We're not sure. But we'll just start without him. If they want to come in, I can let them into the Zoom meeting. But yeah, so today we're going to be discussing John Vervaeke's 3 lectures, 28, 29, and 23, all really to do with relevance realization.
30, not 23, but yeah.
23, yeah, 30, thank you. Yeah, all to do with relevance realization. If you guys check in the notes, Pleasure of Doubt has compiled like notes for all the way back to episode 7, really. So if you want to check those out, like if you want to skim instead of like going through watching all 50 hours of Vervaeke's lecture series, you can get the highlights from there and at least see. And it's been very helpful too in like if there's some subject that is like referenced in, say, episode 29 or something like that, that was from back a couple episodes ago, you can search for that exact phrasing and usually find it to when it was first referenced.
Yeah, and in there you'll find my little notes to myself because I've made this available to everyone, but I'm not going to bother to go back and edit out my own little comments for the public one. So you can all enjoy my little. I put them in brackets though, so you can ignore them if you want, or. And I've locked the document for editing, but you can make comments onto the document and in the Google Doc, and I'll still so.
Oh, and yes, perfect. Yes, we did just start, Susan. Good timing. All right. So do you want to start us off, Brett, as to sort of the core, I don't know, main ideas from the 3 lectures that we watched today?
Yeah, sure. So these lectures are really, I think we're really starting to get to the ramp up. I think to I think John Vervaeke's big reveal, like his plan. That's what it feels like. We're now in his wheelhouse. We're in the area that he's done research in, which is where he's written papers on, and I think you get this sense that he's really building to his big, this is what I want to do. So the focus of these 3 lectures, and I think the next 2, which I haven't listened to yet, is on relevance realization, which is so relevance is what is salient to us, what is important to us, what grabs our attention, and the act of actually picking and zeroing in on what is relevant to us, and what neuroscience can tell us about it. And so these 3 lectures he's setting out, well, he's got there's some interesting subcategories, but the big ideas is that 1, there can't be a theory of relevance itself, and 2, there can be a theory of relevance realization. And what he does by the end is he ties in pretty well everything that we've come before, that insight, meaning, all the psychotechnologies that he's gone over in the 27 episodes up till now really converge on relevance realization, and that it sort of ties all these concepts together. And I think what I'm gathering is it paves the way to his religion that's not a religion, that that really relevance realization is at the core of intelligence, it's at the core of problem solving, it's at the core of insight, which is at the core of meaning and transcendence and altered states of consciousness. And so it all comes together in these 3 lectures. So
I noticed like in towards I think the beginning of episode or lecture 28, he goes into kind of getting a better understanding of like what is intelligence really, and intelligence is not as simple as just kind of a problem solving thing, because problems are different. They don't share the same singular essence to how a problem is structured, because there's going to be different types of problems. And since there's different types of problems, there's going to need to be different ways of dealing with them as they're different problems. And even like I think from last lectures, we talked about there's combinatorial explosion. Is that how
I know it's a word that's impossible to say without
Yeah.
stumbling on your tongue.
Yeah.
Combinatorial explosion.
Right.
Yeah.
And where like if you present a problem to somebody in such a way that they're going to try to solve it like it's some problem that they're already used to. So the example he uses is to try to prove mathematically whether you take off 2 dominoes from a chessboard, whether or not you'll be able to cover all the chessboard with dominoes. Like there's only 2 squares, and can you determine mathematically that it can or cannot be done? And if you're trying to understand it that way, without taking into account the colors of the chess square that you're having to cover, then you won't be able to work it out. And that's what he means by combinatorial explosion.
Right. That most problems are, we think of problem solving as logical, as deductively logical, but most problems really can't be solved by pure deductive reasoning, because the possibilities, the number of potential factors that could play a part are huge. They're practically infinite. That they're beyond our ability as human agents to cognitively assess, and they're beyond computers as we even have it today to cognitively assess. So the amount of calculations involved, whether from a human perspective or trying to devise an AI, an artificial intelligence, is just huge. So what we need to do is focus on what's relevant. We need to reduce what the number of factors that we're paying attention to a manageable number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he brings up that like what intelligence basically is to take ill-defined problems, turn them into well-defined problems without falling into the trap of combinatorial explosion.
Or that finding a way around combinatorial explosion is a mark of intelligence.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, and his main, kind of, I guess, key thing here is that he's giving up the ghost in some ways, in saying that he's not going to be able to produce a scientific understanding of relevance. That is something that is kind of outside the scope of science, similar to how not all problems share the same essence. Relevancy doesn't share the same sort of well-defined structure to things. It's going to be ultimately dependent upon, let's see, at one point he does specify that relevancy seems ultimately dependent upon there being some sort of subject, somebody or something that has goals and is trying to like retain its own existence. And that is where you'll be able to kind of build an understanding of relevancy.
Right. That we can't, that we can, that he's not saying, and we'll come, and there's actually a topic I want to come to just briefly before we get to the theory of relevance realization, but he's not saying that it's not real. He's not saying it's not important. He's just saying it doesn't meet the factors for science. In a few minutes, I mean, we can get into that. One point before we get into that, he talks about communication. I found it really interesting in 28, where he's saying, when you use language, you are always communicating beyond what you're saying. So even language itself is combinatorially explosive. That we're always reading in to what we're saying. We're never just we're never. Well, I guess maybe not never, but we're very rarely just communicating the words that we use. So he gives the example of, if you're lost and you shout, "Excuse me," or actually he gives the example of when you're running out of gas. You shout, "Excuse me, I'm out of gas," to somebody. And they say, "Oh, there's a gas station." So there's a whole lot going on beyond what you just said. They're assuming that you're talking to them, that you're asking, a short question for a little bit of help, that you're not saying you're completely out of gas, but that you're running low and that you want a place that's a gas station that's close by, and that you're looking for one that's open and not closed. So there's a list, and it's again, it grows and grows and grows.
Yeah, if you were to sort of try to fully comprehend exactly what somebody was saying in a sort of systematic fashion, you would either be leaving out a lot of the, I guess, implied information that was still being conveyed to another person that has a similar background and understands like your goals and intentions behind why you're even saying such a thing to them. Like if you were to try to build an artificial intelligence, that you would have to like build in all of this other underlying structures just for it to be able to understand it. But in order, like if you were to try to approach it from a sort of systematic fashion like that, you would very much fall into the combinatorial explosion of trying to take every single little thing as being relevant to the very situation that you're falling within. Hi, Nick.
Which is why it's, oh, hey Nick, how you doing? Glad you're is he in, or is he in the chat?
Yeah, he's in.
Oh, great. Oh no, my window's too small. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it. I'm not in gallery view. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay, there we go. Thanks. So,
can I say something? I'd like to say something about
go
that.
ahead.
So, the robot battery bomb thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, do you want to just explain it for the audience?
It was like in episode 28, he was talking about like in trying to sort of create a GPS, a general problem solving like robot, and you're to sort of like create it with goals and dangers. So trying to build a robot that wants to seek out, say, a battery or something like that, but it also has to be careful of different dangers, like a bomb or something like that. How is it going to weigh out and calculate the kind of risks it would be taking in trying to achieve the battery, while also not falling into combinatorial explosion of trying to like take into account every single side effect to its actions, and also trying to make sure that it doesn't fall into like disregarding everything as irrelevant or considering everything as relevant.
Right. It's very difficult to give instructions to a robot of what information to take into account, and just as importantly, if not more importantly, what information to ignore.
Right.
Because relevance realization is about ignoring massive amounts of information. There's an unlimited amount of information we're ignoring and not even thinking about. It's not just that we're thinking about it. If we were to think about it and discard it, like the robot is stuck forever because it's going through a massive number of things. So it's not just ignoring it. It's not even thinking about it. It's just dismissing it without even having it come to your mind, but in an intelligent way. So sorry, concept. So that, did you want to pick it up from?
Sure. So when I heard him talking about that, I just, in the background of our conversations, you probably know that I'm not super fond of a lot of what's being said. And this particular example just made me quite frustrated. Because, for instance, a person, when they're interacting with such a scenario, they're not going to really pay attention to anything that isn't readily important to them. And we can already sort of notice this when we go to our car. We don't really care about anything unless it's out of the ordinary. And we're taught, what is ordinary, before we really go forward. So we see a car and we're like, okay, well, this is a car. Everybody's driving around the cars. They're doing just fine. right? But and so we don't really look for an explosive under the car or mounted on the side of the car where, we don't really care. If we see something weird, right, then we're going to be like, there's something weird. What is that? Because it is something that sticks out of the normal framework that we see. The robot is noticing, hey, there's this battery and there's this wagon and there's this bomb, right? Okay, so first you sort of have to understand that there's even a bomb. If it doesn't even know what a bomb is, it's just gonna be like, all right, battery wagon, weird thing that I don't know about, right? And we generally don't care about the thing that we don't know about unless we have some reason to care about it, like that something sticks out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole wheels, being able to revolve, all this other stuff doesn't really stick out.
So is it like if we were to make a artificial intelligence, we would sort of build it with these sort of probably like a composite or a collection of all of the categories to things. So like the CAPTCHA readings where you'll see, okay, this is a traffic signal, this is a stop sign, this is a car. These are all so.
No,
okay.
That's not what I'm saying. No, I mean we enter weird situations all the time that we have no idea what these situations are. Children do it all the time when they're just growing up. They wander around and that's generally why an adult has to say, hey, you should probably not interact with that thing. It's dangerous, right? Because the kid's like, oh, it's a lump of stuff. I don't give a crap because it means nothing to them, right? We sort of have to learn through experience, or it has to be taught to us, right? And so we're not analyzing all of the stuff all of the time because there's no signals to tell us to even care about it. We analyze something when there is a signal, like it's loud, it's moving. There's a bunch of stuff built into our particular system.
But it's also that we are more intelligent than the robot, right? I think he brings it up to show why it's so difficult to program a robot to do this, whereas we do it without much difficulty at all.
No, but that's what I'm trying to say is that robot or not, I mean, animals have the same basic system, like a rodent running around. It's going to pay attention to something that either changes, like motion or light or sound, something that is out of the ordinary. And a lot of times, give a good example, wolves. Wolves that haven't ever interacted with humans. They don't know what a human is, right? And they won't treat it as anything particular. They'll sniff around and they won't do anything. I know a guy that he was telling me about this. I think it was somewhere in Canada. The wolves hadn't really interacted with hunters before, so people that would interact with them, the wolves had no idea, and so they didn't treat humans as a threat. They didn't treat them as food. They sort of treated them like just a plant. It's just there's nothing in particular there for them to notice.
Until they see a human kill their friend, and then they feel threatened. But imagine you're programming a robot, and you say, so can you give the command to a robot, only pay attention to what is ordinary, and I think the point is, only pay attention to what is out of the ordinary, or both. I mean, you have to also pay attention to the ordinary too. How do you define ordinary in a way that a robot can understand it?
Contrast.
But that's what his point is. So if you contrast it, there's an potentially unlimited number of things you can contrast it to.
Not particularly.
That's where it becomes
combinatorially
explosive.
AI is already trained to find similarities and in images, and that's actually how like machine learning in general works. Is you feed it this giant data set, and it finds the signals that are particularly similar, right? It's not that they're exactly the same. It looks for a similarity, and it attaches a value to that similarity. That's how it is able to figure out, okay, this is a cat and this is a pineapple.
Right. So that's the way we're training AI to recognize what is relevant, right?
No, I'm saying relevant to something else. I'm saying that the idea of relevance really isn't in that AI situation with the robot. I mean, with the battery and the bomb. I'm just, I'm saying that we pay
So,
attention to things.
well, let me just say this out. Here's how he defines relevance realization. He says relevance realization is intelligently ignoring irrelevance and zeroing in and making the relevant stuff salient. So
Sure.
that's his definition of relevance realization.
Right, and that's what I don't. That's what I'm trying to say. I disagree with, because it's not that you're ignoring something; it's that you're paying attention to some things, and ignoring is an effect of that. Right? Ignoring isn't really an active process. It's not like I recognize this thing, now I'm going to disregard it. I recognize thing, I'm going to disregard
But
it.
you can pay attention to things that are irrelevant, right?
Well, also, if you're a robot and you're having like a full camera system, there's going to be a whole lot of information that is going to be input into you that you'll need to sort, either to make it relevant or irrelevant in regards to whatever goal or.
Well, no, that's what I'm trying to say is you're just going to tag things that are important. Everything else is just disregarded outright. It's not even tagged as irrelevant. It's just not tagged as important.
Okay.
There's a difference between the two things. One is an active thing. One is a passive thing.
Right. The passive is ignoring what's irrelevant. The active is zeroing in on the relevant stuff. And
No. I'm saying particularly noting that something is irrelevant is active, whereas noting things that are relevant and just not even tagging the other stuff is a passive ignoring. So it's sort of like when you're looking around your room, the only things that you're going to really notice are things that stick out to you. Everything else isn't even processed. It isn't tagged as irrelevant.
No, but that's what his point is. The irrelevant stuff, you don't. There's a potentially unlimited number of things to not pay attention to. So
yes.
So he said that specifically. It's not just ignoring them. It's not even assessing them in the first place.
That's what I'm saying is you don't assess them because they don't stick out. There's not enough signal there for you to.
Right. So it's not salient.
All right. So is your point, concept that if we were to make a general problem solver, we wouldn't need to have any sort of system of marking things as irrelevant? All we would really need is for marking things as being relevant to the general problem solver.
Most of the time, yeah. The only time you need to really mark something as irrelevant is when you're sorting the data that you have tagged as relevant, or at least noteworthy, because
sort of like taking it out of removing the value of relevancy to the information and then moving it over since it's no longer relevant.
Yeah, most of the time when we're looking around at things, the signal that we get that are outstanding, that's what we consider noteworthy, right? Like a painting on the wall or a big patch of color on the wall. If the color is moving around, you're like, is that a bug? Is that a creature? Like if this spot is not doing anything in particular, it's less noteworthy, but it is contrasted against the rest of its environment. So it's somewhat noteworthy because it is a collection of properties, right? Whereas everything else is sort of just not even noteworthy.
So I understand what you're saying there, but how are you relating it to the robot example? Oh, sorry. I understand what you're saying there, but how are you relating it to what he's bringing up in the robot, which is that it's challenging to program an AI to do this, where it's much easier for humans to do it?
Yeah, the wheels thing. The wheels can turn X amount of degrees, the blades of grass that the thing is sitting on.
Yeah, if you were to like try to tell a robot to take into account all of the side effects to your actions. So if you move your robot arm forward, what is it going to do to the rest of the environment by doing so? Or if you're carrying a wagon, what are all the things that are going to change based upon your action?
Right.
I mean, this is a thought experiment, right? Like he's demonstrating
all of this data because it isn't causing us any effect. Like when we pull a wagon, I give zero craps, what is going on there, because grass, it is grass. It doesn't do anything. People already know what grass is, right?
So by having the concepts already of grass versus balm or wheels, then that gives us a ability for which we want to focus on. Like the side effects of moving a wagon that brings along a bomb will be relevant to you because you don't want to carry along a bomb with you. But
grass and balm.
When a child is operating with a wagon,
but you can't just relate a child's intelligence to a robot's.
I'm trying to explain this. So when a child is pulling a wagon around, it's only going to really notice something if it is causing an effect that is contrary to what they're trying to do. So if they're pulling this wagon around on grass, gravel, doesn't matter, they're going to basically just notice side effects. They're not going to really pre-process those effects. And so when they match that system, when they match those factors together next time, there is just going to be voided out of the system.
They'll just sort of do the same exact behavioral pattern without it. So I think that's a good point, because that distinguishes the difference between how a animal or a child will consider things versus how we'll have to train an artificial intelligence to consider. What I brought up with CAPTCHA, like in order for an artificial intelligence to recognize a face, you have to put 10,000 pictures of faces. And then when you feed a picture of a face into it, then it can recognize, oh, that's similar to this face. But if you were to put a face that's, say, upside down, that might sort of throw the artificial intelligence off a bit. And then you might have to add in, okay, these are all upside down faces. Or if you put in an African American's face, that'll be a whole another sort of thing that they'll have to recognize as being another face.
Right. But just to be clear, I think,
which is different from how children interact or build up concepts.
I think we have to be careful. We don't want to read too much into this robot example. I mean, this is an instructive example that he's bringing up to help explain these concepts to us. I don't think he's talking about an actual robot, an actual programmed robot. I mean, I'm sure early AI programmers did run into similar problems like this, but
the problem still exists. The problem still exists, and
right.
So the reason that exists is sort of what I was trying to state earlier, is that we come with a lot of pre-built software. Some of the stuff that is really bad, especially with the faces kind of thing, is that it's trying to use pixel similarities, like pixel. It's trying to use the pixels, right? But when a person looks at a thing, they're not seeing that. What they're seeing is a particular set of properties, right? They're seeing things like shapes, they're seeing lines. Trying to get a computer to understand where an object begins and starts is really hard right now, because
so hold on, are you agree? Just so I can situate your comment, because this is where I think I'm a bit off balance. I'm not quite sure if you're sort of, you seem at first to be disagreeing with him, but now you seem to be agreeing with him.
I agree with that the current AI is terrible. I'm saying it doesn't have to be terrible, and the reason,
but I mean in the context of his presentation,
specific things, and so trying to relate AI to actually how this idea of concepts work in terms of relevance is an improper analogy. That's what I'm trying to point out here, is that how we actually do this thing is not how current terrible AI does the thing.
Right. I think what the relation that he was having from relevance realization to artificial intelligence is if we can create some sort of scientific model for how humans have some sort of relevance realization and general problem solving, then we can both solve the meaning crisis in the modern age, as well as maybe give us insight into how to produce artificial intelligences using that same sort of model. I agree. As it is currently, artificial intelligences do not use the same models of relevance realization as humans do.
I'm just trying to say that his example with that robot and trying to relate that to this idea of combinatorial explosiveness is a bad one, because that is just the current AI. That's not how people actually do.
No, but that's his point.
I think that was sort of his.
No. I'm saying that he's trying to relate AI to people, and
hold on. It was a point to show how this doesn't work as an intelligent system. This doesn't work as a general problem solving because it runs into combinatorial explosion.
So let me try to explain how I see his point here, and it links back to.
We should also probably move on soon.
yeah, we should. But just to bring it home, I think it relates to his last lecture where he was talking about we think about problem solving instinctively as being logical, deductively logical, but that is impractical for the vast majority of problems. There are problems where we can be purely deductive, where we set up the premises and it's well defined and it just leads to the conclusions. But most problems, like take good notes, most problems like, how to have an effective conversation right now between us. These are problems that you cannot solve through deduction. You have to solve it through induction. You can't, there's too many potential factors, and we don't have all the terms defined. And that is why we get into these problems. And if we treat it like pure deduction, pure logic, then we're going to run into problems. We're not going to be good problem solvers. We have to focus our attention on what is relevant, and we have to reduce our space, reduce our sights, reduce our vision.
One of the interesting things he brought up is like, if you were to like have a conversation with somebody, or like just the fact of like trying to tell the truth. The fact is, like, we can't exactly tell the truth 100% all the time because we don't know. But there's also ways in which we can tell true things while still convey a meaning that causes the other person to think an untrue thing. So it's almost like a lie through omission. Like the example he uses, like if somebody asks you, how many kids do you have? Oh, I have one kid. And then somebody else asks you, oh, I have two kids. Like, well, why'd you say that? Because it is true that you have one kid, but you also have another kid. And so for you to not also say, oh, I have one kid and I also have this other kid, is sort of you're still telling the truth, but because you're not telling the entirety of the truth. And that's the thing, like if somebody asks you to tell the truth about something, you don't need to tell the entirety of truth regarding that thing. He kind of bases it all down to be relevant. That's like the main maxim that you require in order to have these types of conversations. But in order to be relevant, you have to be relevant in regards to the other person, in regards to the conversation that is taking place, and also in relation to the context that you're within. So like,
right. So he lays out these four maxims that we tend to assume if we're assuming the other party's in good faith trying to communicate with us. But the first one is we assume that they're trying to convey the truth. So not necessarily that they are conveying the truth, but they're trying to. That we assume they're trying to convey the right amount of information, that they're trying to put it in a format most helpful to us, and finally, that they're trying to give us relevant information. That these are assumptions sort of that we have to make in order to have effective communication. And a lot of this depends on, this brings back to what I was saying before about that so much of what we're saying to one another, we have to read between the lines, we have to have these assumptions in order to properly understand the other person. Now, because we have to do this, it can run into problems because we have to read in meaning to what other people say.
Mm.
But we've all been in these discussions when it's an us versus them discussion. And what people do then is they start reading in different assumptions. They start reading in, I think, the opposite of those maxims. They start assuming the other side is not trying to convey the truth, that they're not trying to give the proper, the right amount of information. They're trying to hide information, or they're trying to cherry pick. They're trying to sell us a bill of goods. That they're not trying to put it in the format most helpful. They're trying to be evasive. They're trying to skirt around, the problems they know, and
right.
they're not trying to be relevant.
So just like in the way where, like, when in order to tell somebody that, hey, I'm running low on gas, can you show me the direction of the nearest gas station? There's a lot of amount of conveying information that isn't even being said there, but the other person is sort of, I guess you could say, projecting it onto you. But it's a worthwhile projection because it actually fulfills the needs. If somebody is, say, in a combative sort of mindset between somebody else in sort of an argumentation, then they're going to be projecting their own amount of figuring, kind of like what you were saying, that the other person is sort of hiding information, or is trying to say things that are just trying to make their own side look good. And that's true. That does happen quite a bit of the time. But yeah, in order to have actually productive conversations, you have to, I don't know, work around that.
Listen, like I used to say to people, like when people did that to me, when they read in, like most of the time in online discussions, for example, people read in motives that often aren't there. So when that's where we get the straw man. And I would often say to them, please just respond to what I say, not what you think is behind what I'm saying. And in listening to Vervaeke here, I realized that I was probably being a little bit unfair there, that we do have to always be reading it. We're never just taking exactly what the person says. We always have to read in. The question is, how do we rein it in so we're reading in the right things, the helpful things, and not the unhelpful things? I think and so we have to assess the person. Is this a person? There are people who are dishonest. So is this a person that we can justify applying these 4 maxims to, or are they not? And when should we, and when shouldn't we? And it becomes a lot trickier. And maybe I should be more forgiving of the people who do this and more understanding of why they are reading in, because it's sort of, we have to do this. We have to read in, but there's a weakness. We have biases, and it can color it. And so sometimes it can really lead us astray.
Yeah. I don't know, thinking of Dale Carnegie and his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, he has this rule about ascribe to the other person the best of motives.
Principle of charity.
Yeah. And by doing so, even if, like, you personally don't think that they had these exact motives for their interactions with you, maybe they were working off of more malicious things, or selfish, or anything like that. You can, if you ascribe to them these higher motives, or more noble motives, and then represent your argument to them in regards to that specific motive, they, in wanting to accept these sort of noble attributions to them, will be more charitable towards your response and sort of accepting of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like what a lot of what he's saying is really played into quite well with my own thoughts on these us versus them, but it's really helping round out, why we have these biases. That these biases we tend to think of, again, of bias as bad, but it's not that simple. We need these biases. We can't, because of the combinatorial explosion problem, we have to use heuristics. We have to use short forms. We have to zero in. We have to make assumptions, or else we cannot communicate. It's just impossible. But there's big downsides to it. And I think if we keep this in mind when we're talking with people, it will help us be more charitable too, because we'll realize that this guy who's reading in negative emotions in me, who's misreading me, isn't necessarily doing it because they're ill-intentioned. They're trying. They're doing what we all have to do, and they're biased in doing it, but it's part of human nature. And if we understand that, then we can maybe not get as angry when it happens, not get as frustrated, not to say you're straw manning me, you jerk, and the conversation falls apart, but say, okay, I think I see what's happening here. I see what you're reading in here, and I get it, but let me try to fill in some of these blanks. Like maybe then we have to try to recognize the other person's what they're reading in, figure out if that's what they're doing, and see if we can deal with it.
I want to hear from Nick because I feel so bad. Like we've been going on quite a few tangents, and he's just been sitting very patiently this whole time.
Oh, that's fine. If I have something to say, I'll hop in. I was just listening.
Yeah. Anything from these lectures that maybe stood out as annoying or frustrating or interesting?
I actually really liked at least 28 and 29. 30 got a little weird for me, and I didn't watch the second half of it, so I'm probably missing where it like comes back together.
He does bring it home. We can come to that, but yeah.
But yeah, I thought that they were really some of his most useful. And again, I do have like criticisms, but it's hard to voice them without perhaps a clear vision of what he's actually intending to do.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same, because like one of the things that he had mentioned was very much how like relevance has to be in regards to a subject. Like it is very much subjectively based. And then besides that, like directly after that, he pointed out, but I don't want to come across as saying that what we find relevant is just our own projections out there onto the world. But countering that as well, I don't want to say that our what we find relevant is something that is imparted to us from the world. So I don't know. It seems almost like he's contradicting himself in such a way.
Isn't that the role of intelligence?
No. It's basically that many things are subject oriented, like the concept of better. Better what? Or behavior of what? Like there's many terms require a subject that it attaches to. So relevancy attaches to something, right? And to me, at least, relevancy is all about attaching to a particular set of factors. So
right, context.
Yeah, a context. So if, for instance, let's say I'm buying a car from someone, and I go look at this car, and they start talking about all the trips they've had in this car, and this other car they've had at one time. Okay, this is all like connected to cars and stuff, but that has no real relevance to the factors involved in buying a car. Like I need to know, does this car function? Does it drive well? Is there any problems with it that I need to be aware of? Like your trip with the car has no relevance to me whatsoever. It might have an inkling in terms of, it can drive far distances without falling apart, but it's not incredibly relevant.
Yeah,
right?
And that's kind of the thing I think about. Like relevance, in order to sort of make sense, has to be in regards to what there are actual components to the world that will be relevant or will not be relevant to you. Yeah. And if it was just entirely subjectively based, like he points out with
subjectively
projection.
or contextually.
See, that's the real important
subjectively.
See, so I like pleasure of doubt statement there though, because it subjective is about mind dependence, right? Whereas what we're talking about is a context, right? So because
which is still mind dependent, but in a different way. It's not about when.
No, I would say factor dependent. Context is all about factors. Like a computational system can understand how to operate on this as well. Like you can say these factors exist. I don't want you to really go outside of these boundaries. That's what I was trying to show you earlier today when I talked about faceted search. If you ever go to like eBay or Amazon, and you click the things on the side, you know, like the filters, like, oh, I want it to be housewares. I don't want it to be about a book. You know, these are nailing down the factors that create the very particular context of what your search is going to fit inside, right? Now, and a search also is basically nailing down the factors as well, because each of the keywords that are used in the search are creating the context of what you're trying to look at. So if I look up how vacuum cleaners work, right, that draws a very particular context. So I'm not looking at good vacuum cleaners to buy because that has nothing to do.
Right. Yeah, and that is how he's explained it, I think, in like maybe 27 or 26, that he relates it to kind of the Kantian understanding of rationality, where it is like objective in a sense, in that this is the limitations or how our minds operate. But it's not like something, it's like the mediator between us and the world. It's not like, or it's the way in which we can understand the world. Just like exactly what you were saying there, Concept F. Like eBay has listings of hundreds, thousands of different items, and you can't look through the entirety of all those items. What you do, though, is create this factoring system of, say, okay, items over $20, under $200, electronic devices from Sony, things like that. And then that like scales down all of the things into what fits those criteria. And I think that's what he's trying to say, that what relevance realization is we have these certain criterias that come up to or come up upon us depending upon whatever context. Like he said in regards to like what makes your wife, your children, your pets, gasoline, and wood all relevant. It's fire. So when there's a fire going on, these are all the things that would kind of be relevant to the situation. But if there was some other,
that's what I couldn't agree with when he said that kind of thing. That's why I'm really, really particular in conversations when I say this is related, this is not relevant. There is a lot of things that are related.
Well, no, because it was relevant because it was things he wants to save as well. But
just to understand the distinction that you're making, relevant has to do with maximizing the goal that you have in mind, whereas related could be independent of whatever goal that you have in mind.
No. So related is just things that
just similarities
that have similarities. They're connected by a relationship of similarity, right? Like in terms of the guys driving around a car on vacation, that has no relevance, but it is related because we're talking about a car for sale. You know, the car for sale is a car.
It's trivial.
Yeah, right. It's connected in terms of a component relationship, but it is not relevant because the factors inside that vacation don't.
But however, let's just say this:
buying the car.
But let's say this: let's say that I wanted to buy the car in order to take a trip, and I wanted to know, can this used car handle a trip? Well, then the fact that this guy took a long trip in his car is relevant.
Yes, because that's part of your factor set, though.
Right. What did you think of what Vervaeke had to say in regards to counting the similarities between items? It doesn't indicate to us like the relevancy for the item.
That part drove me crazy. Like everything that you can use as a weapon can be classified as a weapon, right? But that doesn't really mean much of anything. So most of the time when people are classifying what things are, they're doing it on a very restricted sense. They're saying, okay, what is this made out of? And what is the form? And what is the general function of this thing, right?
Yeah, and usually the function is very anthropocentric.
I don't know.
Something like in regards to like a human needs. So like this is something liftable or
yeah. So I mean, like I can use a cup or a shoe or anything I can toss as a weapon. Anything I can wield with my hand essentially can be considered a weapon, right? But that doesn't that's a side function. That's not a primary function. Like my shoes, the primary function is to be footwear, right? I can classify as a weapon, but that's only if I put it into a context in which a weapon is required.
But he's
right?
not. He wouldn't disagree with you on this. So
No,
I'm not sure where you're disagreeing with him on.
Because it's generating similarity outside of any particular. It's purposely and willfully causing a combinatory explosion. It's not operating as.
Well, but remember, he's a teacher here. He's trying to explain concepts. So he's not. He a lot of the time he's exaggerating. He's coming up with examples designed to really exaggerate the point so that we get it, right?
Okay.
So don't read too much into the examples on a practical level.
Well, he seemed to be really hitting on this idea of, everything's combinatorial explosive. No, they're not.
Well, I think he's pointing out that like these are differing theories for, say, relevancy. And then if we were to abide by that theory, then it would come with these sorts of problems that along with it, that if we, so your point is though, that anything could be made to seem combinatorially explosive. Yes. And he was doing so for all these opposing theories that he was kind of presenting.
Right. These aren't like normal situations in which a combinatory explosive situation would even exist. It just.
Did we explain? Yeah, we did. Okay. I wanted to make sure because we're using this term a lot. I want to make sure our audience is understanding.
Here, let me ask this. Does anybody disagree with him when he says the key to intelligence is the capacity for relevance realization? You don't. So I'll elaborate on what he says, and then we can discuss. So he says selective attention, deciding how to hold in working memory what's important to you, dealing with the combinatorial explosion in the problem space, which is and interacting with the proliferation of side effects. So how you deal with that, how you zero in on the relevant salient information is a question of intelligence. That if you're good at zeroing in on relevant information, then you're more intelligent, you're a better problem solver than somebody who is not good at zeroing in on what is relevant.
I can agree with that. So I would say it's a marker. I wouldn't say it is what makes you intelligent.
No, it's one aspect of intelligence.
So I can agree.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else disagree with his position there?
I think I do, but it seems almost like the usage of the word relevance is more, it's almost going further than just being intelligent. It seems more to do with like being a good person or like having a good character is being relevant for the people that you're interacting with and relevant to the situation that's going at hand. Where I don't know. It doesn't.
That might be a slightly different use of relevance there. I'm getting a sense that it's a slightly different context there. Like you're when you mean like when I'm relevant to you, I'm imposing myself in your life and making myself salient to you. But I don't think that's quite what he's talking about in terms of problems.
Okay, so being intelligent has to do with So like even without interactions with other people, you could still be good at relevance realization and then be classified as intelligent.
Yeah, like sugar is relevant to foods that require sugar, like that kind of thing.
And understanding the connection between the food that you're trying to make and the requirement for sugar for it.
Yeah,
he talked about the relevance problem. So that the problem of trying to determine what's relevant is at the core of what makes you intelligent. So that relevance realization is therefore at the core of what it means to be intelligent.
Right. That is something I would say is different than the conception of relevant. Figuring out
he'd agree with you. Yeah.
what factors make something relevant is, what things should you include in your factor set is different than are things relevant to a factor set. Those are two separate things.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
One's sort of normative, the other is sort of descriptive.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so one instance I could say certain qualities of being a good person that are relevant to me would be being a good father, being a good brother, being a good son. However, being a good person, also other things that would also fit within that is being a good daughter, being a good mother, being a good sister. Those are things that I wouldn't like. It would be silly for me to accept those things in regards to my own living a life. But it is still true that those would be relevant for how to be a good person.
I think that kind of usage of the definition might be stretching it. And that's the other thing that really drove me nuts in this whole thing is he seems to be stretching this idea out of what it fits into. Like a person can understand the statements you made, but that's only because of our ability to see concepts as similar. And we can basically do error correction in what we're saying, right? So I could say, let's see, a good example of I need to turn down my pain. Well, that doesn't really make, explicit sense, right? But you can understand what I'm saying, right? Because you can basically extrapolate, okay, well, what does turn down actually mean? And then how do I apply that to this particular thing that he just said that he would like to turn down, right? So, but the statement itself is not formally applicable to that context. Do you see what I'm saying?
What context? Because I can understand certain contexts.
Pain. Like if I said, hey, I'm in great pain, I'd like to turn down my pain. Like turn down is not a concept that formally applies to pain, right? I would like to reduce my pain. And when I turn things down, that has a function of reducing something. Right.
I see. And so we're able to sort of connect that, even like if you sort of misspoke there and you said turn down when that normally wouldn't be applied to pain things, we can still sort of understand the connection there. So like an example that I've heard where like if you train a dog to get a dish towel, when you say dish towel, bring me a dish towel, and then it does so. And say like, I don't know, you have a puddle or something that you need to clean up. And you say to the dog, bring me a dish towel. The dog goes to it and doesn't see there's a dish towel there, and then just has to return without being able to bring you anything. Now, if you said to a human,
something related, right?
Well, that's the thing. Like a dog wouldn't be able to just like reformulize his thinking to bring you, say, a sponge or a jacket or a blanket or a towel or regular.
Well, I've seen that happen though. Dogs do that kind of thing.
Well, but dogs do have some intelligence, right?
Similar.
Yeah. I'm saying like, okay, so
the more intelligent one is, the more one is able to adapt in these situations to figure out what the relevant information is.
Yeah, the dog though is responding to its training. It understands the word dish towel, or is built up as an association of here are the syllables dish towel, and go grab this thing that I know, this rag type thing, and then bring them that. But if there was no dish towel available to them, they wouldn't be able. They might bring you something unrelated. But what really the person is trying to tell the dog, but of course but a human would be able to understand, is bring me something that is absorbent. And the human will be able to, if there's no dish towel, bring something else to replace it. And that's a component to human thinking that is like taking an abstraction from the function or the purpose of the object itself and finding another object that also qualifies within that function or purpose.
Yeah, we do this a lot. You can see this with slang and metaphors. It's essentially you're taking this idea and you're twisting its or distorting its original intention. This is why, you know, in like rap music, they say, you know, getting turned up, you know, like what they're saying is like they're turning up like an intensity, right? And that's what you do when you like go party or get drunk and stuff like that. You change your particular circumstance. So it's distorting its original intention.
You're so hip, concept.
Uh, but yeah, so you know we can do this, right? But so what I'm saying is that when he says that, you know, uses this term relevance in all of these various situations, some of them I think formally fit, and other times I feel like he's just using it metaphorically, and that.
Okay, well, let me bring it home. Like before we move on to 29, and where we really get into why the theory of relevance versus the theory of relevance realization. He ends 28 by really nailing down why he's bringing all this up. So he calls it the convergence to relevance realization. I think it's sorry.
Oh no. Sorry, I noticed that Nick was trying to get back in. There you go, Nick. Go ahead.
Okay. So he gives sort of a rundown of all the different ways that that relevance realization is crucial to this whole project of the awakening from the meaning crisis. So he says relevance realization is crucial to insight. Insight is central to wisdom. Relevance realization is crucial to consciousness and attention. Altering states of consciousness are crucial to wisdom and meaning making. What makes somebody wise is the ability to zero in on what is relevant. So it's this loop that all these concepts that he's been talking about really come together in relevance realization, and he brings it to salience and truth and connection to reality, and so he sort of refers to meaning as a metaphor, where he says, what if when we use the metaphor of meaning, we're talking about how we find things relevant to us, to each other, parts of ourselves relevant, you know, to each other, and how we're relevant to the world and how the world is relevant to us. So that when we're talking about meaning, we're talking about relevance. We're talking about how we're relevant to the things around us, how those things are relevant to us, how the parts of us are relevant, you know, all these different plays at what meet at the heart of meaning is relevance. And this is what I think he's that he says all this language of connection, of establishing relations, is the relevance between things. And so he says maybe there's a deep reason why manipulating relevance realization affords self-transcendence, wisdom, insight. And it's because relevance realization is the ability to make connections at the core of meaning. And this is what's a threat in the meaning crisis. Sorry?
I can agree with that. Me and you've talked a bit about, well, I think I shared that post I made about meaning, like the definition.
Yeah.
So it's basically the conveyance of importance, value, information, that kind of thing. So basically effect, right? So to find something that is relevant to you is basically to find something that has some kind of positive effect to you. It's not just related to you, it's that it has some kind that it fits within the factor set of who you are, right? Basically what I was saying about relevant earlier is it's about factor set, right? And so if this thing directly ties into your factor set, then it is related, not just related to, it is relevant to you, right?
Okay, so I can kind of understand it a little bit better how relevancy is directly related to a subject in regards to what the identity of the subject is, sort of like the agent arena relationship. So if, say, somebody identifies with being a doctor, then there are going to be certain things that will be relevant to them, and say there might be similar goals that, say, like he wants to make money and raise a family and things like that, that a dentist would have those same sorts of goals, but because he has like accepted the label of doctor or identity of doctor, there are going to be different approaches that he would take than, say, a dentist or a cashier or internet mogul would be taking.
I would like to expand on this doctor example. So people know that doctors have something to do with medicine, right? And medical stuff, right? And so if somebody just says, hey, you're a doctor, I saw this article about neuroscience, right? Or brain surgery. And that doctor is like, but I'm a pediatrician. That has nothing to, there's no relevance to me, right? Because just because he's a doctor doesn't mean that he's that kind of doctor, that his medical interests are that, right? Now, if you know that this doctor has that outside interest, then it is relevant to them. But so their personal interests, you know, most of the time are going to be related to their particular what they do, right? If they have that side interest, that's not, you know, the same thing as what they do. But what they do is most certainly within their boundary of interest, right? So if they're a pediatrician and you say, hey, I saw this article, you know, that is relevant to pediatrician, you know, medical stuff, then it would most certainly be relevant to them, right? So because it is directly tied to the factors that exist within their existence, right? And so, you know, some of these factors are just part of our existence, whereas other things like our hobbies or interests, these are things that we just prefer because we prefer them. They're not directly tied to actions that we are a part of, right?
Although our hobbies could have among the most meaning to us, right? Sometimes.
Well, sure. Yeah, but I'm just saying that's not the same thing, the same kind of factors that are directly tied to our action set, right?
Like what he's leading up to, and he ends 28 with this, is that he wants to create new psychotechnologies, reappropriate the old ones, and coordinate them systematically to regenerate what he calls these fraying connections, to re-legitimate and afford the cultivation of wisdom, self-transcendence, connectedness to each other in the world. And I'm just trying to nail down relevance in there. Like when I think, okay, one of the most meaningful things in my life is, you know, my role as a father, right? So how does relevance play in that? Like being a father changes what is salient to me. I mean, that suddenly these children are salient to me and these children are important to me. Is that what he's getting at here? I don't know.
I think it's to generate relevance is, I think, what he's trying to get at here, because the things that used to be natural in terms of what was relevant to us, what was important to us, the factors that directly tied to us because they had great importance to us, don't really so much exist anymore. The fraying idea. So you can create something relevant to somebody by showing them that there are these factors that do connect into their being, right? So this is essentially what advertisements try to do. They're trying to say, hey, I know you weren't thinking about this product before, but look how it plugs directly into your life, right? So for instance, an MP3 player, before people even knew what an MP3 player was, you know, they were like, I don't even, they didn't even have an idea that they needed this thing or what had this idea of great importance to them that they could carry this thing around. But when they said, hey, look, you can listen to music when you're on the bus, when you're, you know, on the beach, you can hang out and listen to music with your friends. They're importing, you know, this factor to your being, right? Where it didn't exist before. So it's generating.
And then I think in terms of the meaning crisis, he's saying these psychotechnologies, so meditation, that type of stuff, will make you better at identifying the most meaningful, so
that
identifying
connect with you.
relevance realization of what is most meaningful, what is most wise, what is most, to
Yeah.
give you the capacity for insight to identify what is most relevant in the most positive way. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was saying. So, let's say with taste, like food. How do you know what food you like? Well, experience, right? But some people can know that you like certain food and then suggest food that is
Right.
similar, like has certain flavors or certain properties to it that connect to the thing that you already like, right?
Which would be a type of wisdom in a way. Like that would be intelligent.
Sure,
That would be
sure.
a wise thing to do. I
Right.
know you like this, therefore I think you'll like this, and I have the intelligence and insight to figure that out.
Right. So parents generally try to do this with their children. They say, "Hey,"
And they never believe us.
no, well, not often, but it can be like, "Hey, you're gonna, these kinds of things are what most people like, but it takes them a lot of accidental experience to come to the realization they liked it. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to sell you on this idea that this thing is really good for you, and here's why, right? And so you tell them the properties of the thing, and then that can connect to them. You're essentially marketing meaning to them, right? So for instance, hey, you should really make some friends. Well, why would I want friends? Well, here's why. Here's what friends have to offer you, right? And so you tell them all these things, and you connect the properties of friendship with things that you know that people inherently like. Like, hey, they'll be there for you when you're having a hard time. You'll be able to share experiences that otherwise you just have to basically do it on your own. There's so many properties to this thing, but the thing is that if you just say, hey, friendship is good, they'll be like, well, why? If you don't tell them why, then they don't know, right? They can't connect to a thing. They don't know what the thing is made of or what the thing has as a function, right? Just because you have an idea of what the thing is made of doesn't really tell you its function. In the old days, they essentially tried to sell you on the what. They tried to say, oh, well, this watch, it's made out of this. It's got really great craftsmanship. It's made in Germany. It can keep time really well. It's sort of waterproof and shock resistant. And you're like, okay, and why do I care, right? So what Apple did, this is the genius of their marketing. They basically inverted the direction of marketing. They would sell you on the why. This is essentially sort of like Jonathan Haidt's elephant and the rider thing. You connect with the elephant first, right? You say, hey, check this out. This thing will do all of these amazing things for you, right? And then they're like, okay, well, is it made of good quality? Because the what comes after the why. Because who cares about the what if the why doesn't matter to them? People want to know the why. When you look up a product, do you look up a product in terms of its what? No, generally not. If you're looking up a product, you're generally looking for a function. The function is the why. If I'm looking up a vacuum cleaner, I look up vacuum cleaner.
Well, and the why is about determining what's relevant. I mean, why it's relevant.
Yeah, we name our tools based on the why. We don't really name our tools based on a what. That doesn't make any sense. Like a microwave. Well, what does a microwave do? Well, microwaves things. We didn't call it something else. We called it the thing that it does.
Right. So are we all on the same page here so far? I think so. I think we are. So I think we're getting now into 29, and I think here's 29 and 30, and here we're, for my conversation with Concept Hut beforehand, we may have some disagreement where so in 29 he sets out basically what he thinks he's making the big argument in these two lectures that it is impossible to have a scientific theory of relevance, but it is possible to have a scientific theory of relevance realization. And so he builds it up over these two lectures. And I think Concept Hut and I haven't talked to John about it, but I know from talking before, are disagree. I think I get what I at least get. I think I get what his argument there. I think Concept disagrees with him. So we can.
Yeah, I think I pretty much already went over that, though. It's like my idea of what it is, relevance, to figure out how, what it is and how it functions. That is just about like the factor set. And do these things fit the factor set? Yes or no? To me, that is.
Yeah, so that works when you have a factor set already in mind that you're trying to maximize. But for a lot of people, there are instances where, say, you lose your identity, where you had this prior set of factors that you knew what to maximize, and now that is no longer at hand. And it's the attempt to figure out what new factor sets should I adopt.
Yes, that's the generation of relevance. That's what I was trying to say earlier, is that what is relevant is not the same as what the relevant set is, right? They're very different. You have to generate the relevant set, and then you can see if things fit to it or not.
But so now, do you agree with him though on? And I guess I'll summarize. I think actually we're sort of skipping over 29, which I think is fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
And going in on 30. I'll summarize it. But did you agree with him on how he sets out what his tests for a scientific theory are? I mean, here, well, let me set it out first, and then we'll see if we agree. So he goes through his criteria for how you can for what is subject to a theory. So 29, just to summarize it very quickly, is to have a theory of something, it can't be circular. So the theory cannot assume what it's trying to prove. So a theory of relevance realization cannot assume the importance of relevance realization in it. It has to, relevance realization has to be sort of the conclusion. And so 29, he spends going through, different options that different scientists tried to come up with a theory of relevance realization that he says doesn't quite fit. So I think we can skip over that. In 30, he lays out, he talks about John Stuart Mill and the criteria to have a theory. And so he says, he gives the example in the concept of the example of horses, but so you have to have an essence. So there has to be a way to generalize across the field. The category has to be stable. It can't always be changing. The properties have to be intrinsic, internal, and inherent. So and this is what I think we were talking about earlier, and we can spend a minute on this, of where we're talking about the subjectivity. He's not talking about subjectivity in terms of like, I subjectively like chocolate over vanilla, or, I have a preference for this versus a preference for that. He's saying that to be the object of a scientific study, it has to be a property of the object, an intrinsic property of the object itself, not a construct that we put on the object. So like a bottle, there's nothing inherent about a bottle. If you take a bottle, or here, we'll just take a cup. There's nothing inherent about a cup that it's meant for drinking. There are properties about this cup. It's a certain shape, it's a certain weight, it has a certain number of particles in it, it's a certain wavelength of light, and certain color. Those are properties of the cup. But the fact that it is used for drinking is not an inherent property of the cup. That's a use we put on it. So, well,
I mean, just to push back for a second, the very reason that it exists right now in that shape is due to the fact that it was created for the purpose of drinking.
Now, of course, is that an inherent property of it, though?
Right.
Well, the reason it exists is in that form, in that shape, is in a way an inherent property to it.
So his example was on the bottle thing was, let's say that somewhere in space there was some kind of natural process that created essentially a replica of what we would consider a water bottle, would we say that that particular thing is meant to hold water or fluid? No, because it is just existing. It's sort of like if trees grow up out of the forest into the shape of a chair, do we call that a chair? I would say no. I would say you could use it as a chair, but it is not a chair, right? So we also sort of
that a chair is not an inherent property of that object. You can right. It now he's not saying that's not something that we do have the intention for. He's not saying it's not real that it's sort of conceptually used as a chair. It's just we can't treat it scientifically because it's not an inherent property of the object which we use as a chair.
Right.
So we can't have a science of chairs.
Right. Well, I disagree on that, but and this goes into where Buck was talking here, that the flattening of two contexts here is what I found really frustrating as well with this, is that I understand his model example, I really do, but that's a natural object, whereas an artificial or agent constructed object inherently contains the function, because the thing that was artificially generated had that function designed into it, right? It was meant to do that thing, right? So it's two separate contexts, and to flatten them into the same, I find to be disingenuous.
Maybe like agentially created. So like the use of an artificial object is in reference to, say, an agentially created thing. So like you could say, like, even though they occur in nature, a beaver's dam would be sort of an artificial structure that is being done by the beaver. In, I guess, the same way you could say a cup is an artificial structure imposed upon the substance or the material in order to use it for our own purposes of being able to drink out of.
Right.
So it's not intrinsic to the properties of the object.
Sure.
It's we put those properties into it.
But it's still important. That's the idea. That's the whole idea, though, in terms of inherent or intrinsic, is that it comes along with the thing, and because it was created by an agent, those properties come along with the thing. If it is not created by an agent, then those properties do not come along.
Now, do you agree with him that we can't have a science of things that aren't intrinsic? Like we can't have
nature? No, I can't.
In general, that in order to scientifically study something, you have to have a general category that's homogeneous, that's stable, that persists over time, that can be generalized. Like that, I can study one horse. And he gives this example, and I can study that one horse, and I can make certain generalizations about other horses. I can then test it to make sure, but by studying one horse, I can make generalizations about other horses. So you have to have an essence. It has to be stable. The category has to be stable. The properties must be intrinsic, internal, and inherent. Rather than what he calls them attributive properties, and I think of it as sort of social construct. That's another way of, I think, saying attributive properties. Mm-hmm. Like again,
so is engineering a science?
Oh, I don't want to get into that. I know people have huge debates on that. Oh man, I've seen like people want to kill each other over this. Is engineering a science? So I don't know. I just plead ignorance on that one.
So there's a debatable difference between inherent and intrinsic, but I would say that they have the same spirit or goal. I would say that they just essentially didn't really understand what they were trying to say. So let me look here. For instance, intrinsic is belonging naturally, essential, right?
But are we just using them equivalently though?
But I think that's what generally happens. But the thing here is that the origins of the word intrinsic is inwardly inwards. So it's essentially the same thing, haha, pun intended, as inherent, which is existing in something as permanent, essential, or characteristic attribute, with the origin also being very similar in terms of in towards to stick. So basically, they are the same thing, right?
All right.
If you
Well,
want to say
So
one
he
has
would argue that to
inherency
study. Sorry.
versus an artificial inherency, I could agree with that. But to say that inherent or intrinsic is always natural, I could.
No. He's not making that. He's saying to study it scientifically, we have to study intrinsic characteristics to have a scientific theory of it.
Yeah, but that's sort of what I that's what I'm trying to say. I think you can have a scientific study of chairs, for instance. You have to first know what
would that look like?
Okay, so I mean, I think furniture engineers already pretty much have a science of chairs, right?
No. I think he's meaning science is like in order to like create a taxonomy of chairs to better understand them. Like engineers are all in regards to like building chairs.
That's exactly what I'm saying, though.
But engineers aren't studying chairs,
right?
Except for in regards to like their structural foundation.
All right, engineering's not a science. We did it. We solved it.
No. What I'm saying is that to design a thing, you must first understand the thing itself. So
not necessarily.
You have to do the science part before you do the engineering part. And yes, it is.
But you can have a stump. You can have a tree stump and sit on it, and it's a chair, though, right?
No, I'd say that's a stool, but that's a different conversation.
It's a stool a chair? Hold on. No. Let's pause on this. It's not a different conversation. It's the conversation. Is a stool a chair?
I mean, this gets into is a hot dog a sandwich? I really don't think it's a good conversation.
But I think that's part of his point is that you can't because we.
I think you can, but I don't think that's a short conversation.
Well, I think the point that Brett's making is the categorization of these different things is being done sort of subjectively rather than scientifically.
It's not an intrinsic characteristic of whatever we're sitting on that it is a chair. It is use, our attributive property to it. Just like money.
Depending upon the scientists, they'll accept a stool as a chair or they won't accept a stool as a chair, and then they'll build up their scientific understanding of chairs from there.
And something can be a chair in one moment and not a chair in another moment. Sorry?
I would say economists are scientists when it comes to money.
But think about money. like money is but you're probably right there, and he would agree. I think he might agree there, but
very soft science, I guess.
Yeah, if what he's saying is if the property is attributive, we cannot study it scientifically.
I can't agree.
It doesn't mean it's not real.
I mean, if you create a category and the category is stable, then you can scientifically study that category.
But what observation would you make that identifies the intrinsic property of a chair?
Like what? Yeah, what sort of scientific study or observation could you make that would classify or not classify a stool as a chair?
Okay, so a stool doesn't have a backrest.
Gotcha. So chairs must have a backrest in order to classify as chairs.
Yeah.
Why?
Because that's what a chair is.
So yeah, that's your definition of a chair.
How do you determine that?
Based on
what observation can you make to determine that?
How people differentiate them in general.
Right, attributive properties, how people use
them. That's what I'm saying.
But science is based on observations and determining processes by
what I said. I said if you create the category and the category is stable, you can then study the category.
Yeah, but it's an artificial stabilization that you're imposing onto the structure because.
What relevance does that have?
Well, I mean, it's not stable in the same way that a scientific understanding of horses or zebras is stable.
I mean, the source I find to be of no point. Like I don't care if it was a bunch of microbes that did it. I don't care if it's
no. He means the properties of horses.
No, I'm saying I don't care where the construction came from. I don't care about the source. I care that the category itself is stable. Okay. And if the category itself is stable, then you can study it.
Okay, so as long as people continually hold that stools do not classify as chairs, then it can be stable, and then we can build a science off of it. If it turned out that backrests fall out of fashion and now stools are classified as chairs, then the science of chairs from that foundation is no longer stable.
Well, it would have to change. I mean, and this is
Here's the thing.
So
Here's
it's
the
not
thing.
stable.
Concept. I think you're unwittingly agreeing with Vervaeke.
Temporal stability.
What other sense? Okay, what do you mean by stable then? If it's not atemporality,
stability is just it holds together. That's a whole other thing. But I just want to look at.
No, but
hold up, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
So people, if you believe in the theory of evolution and that we all came from some kind of ape or monkey or whatever you want to call it, well, guess what? Humans haven't always been the way we are now. So therefore, not really a stable category in terms of, in the way that he's trying to talk about. The only way you can really classify something as stable is if it is a temporal stability.
No, but can I just jump in here, because I think you're unwittingly agreeing with the Vervaeke, because
I'm not.
Hold on. Let me explain. Let me set it out why, because we haven't gotten there yet, but we'll come to it. But when you said when I asked you what observation can you make for what's a chair, you said, well, how humans identify it. Now we can probably have a science of how the process that humans go through of assigning attributions. And that's sort of like the theory of evolution, why he says you can have a science of relevance realization. You can have a science of how humans go about assigning relevance. You can have a science of how humans go about assigning properties of chairs. You cannot have a science, though, of chairs, because there are no observations that you can make, no intrinsic observations that you can make, no generalizations you can make that apply to all chairs, or why a stool is not a chair, like why a back is important.
But those are two separate things. Those two different things.
Right. He agreed.
No, that's what I was trying to point out, that if you subscribe to the theory of evolution, then it doesn't matter. Then you can't have, if you comply with this Vervaeke science category, then nothing can be a science category.
No, wait, hold on. Do you think he doesn't think the theory of evolution is science?
It really doesn't matter.
No, because he would say the theory of evolution is science, that you can, and we can come to this later in the lecture, where he uses that specific example.
That's highly interesting, because evolution is a human construction.
Our understanding of it, but the processes that are going on are based on
nature. Yes. Okay.
Right. It's not just based on nature necessarily, but we can study them. He would say we can study how humans go about identifying chairs.
Okay, I'm trying to point out that you're shifting the context around, and I'm talking about a very particular context. The context being categories. It doesn't matter how the category got there, because a human hasn't always been a human. A human used to not even exist.
Well, we're talking about the theory of science here, of what makes something
a human
scientific
is a
study.
Science category.
Right. So I think the point that Conceptide is making, that it's similar to how, in order to build a science of chairs, we'd have to put up some sort of arbitrary definition for what classifies as a chair. In order to do the same thing for, say, the scientific understanding of horses or zebras, like you'd have to classify or distinguish a horse from a zebra from the precursor to a horse or a zebra.
Except we try in science, we try not to do it arbitrarily. Calling a stool not a chair is
I think
arbitrary.
Speciation, like the distinctions between like what is and what isn't a species, isn't necessarily like it doesn't have a clear
arbitrary, but they
definition
probably
yet.
wouldn't call that taxonomy. I don't think they call that the science. That's just a tool to help them talk about it.
Right.
The observations are what they're talking about.
We got to be real careful with the word arbitrary, because it's essentially just saying, hey, we just did it just because. Arbitrary is without reason. If you have reason, it's not arbitrary.
Is a beanbag a chair?
A beanbag chair, sure.
Does it have a
That doesn't
back?
have a.
It does have a backrest. It does support your back, and it is something you sit on.
What about those chairs that were
Is a rocking
popular?
chair a chair?
You guys may be
Well,
too,
it has
too
something you
young.
sit on. It has a backrest.
When I was young, I haven't seen them. They may be gone. There was this phase where they came out with all these chairs that were sort of like Zeds, and you would sit in it with your knees, and there was nothing holding up your back, and it was meant to like have positive posture. Would you call those chairs? I mean, they called them chairs, but they didn't have backs.
I see people calling all kinds of things.
Is a car seat a chair?
Yeah, because it has a place you sit and it has a backrest.
But you agree that the only reason we define it,
But
that
a piano
way,
bench would not be a chair. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, but you agree that the only reason we define it that way is not based on an observation of some intrinsic nature of chairs, but that we have decided to call something with a backrest a chair.
No, I would say it's based on observation. We saw that there's a bunch of things that have a similar property, feature set, and we said, okay, well, this particular feature set, we're going to call this thing.
So there's like an essence of chairness that we can understand and then work off of as a sort of scientific basis.
Yeah, so I don't really care where
the two classifications has a backside, a backrest, and also we sit.
What about armrests?
I mean, those are just optional. I mean,
why is an armrest optional but not a backrest?
I don't even know really like what sort of science might be made from a science of chairs.
Vervaeke's point is
there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with chairs. I'll tell you.
No,
I can understand like the engineering of chairs,
right,
but I'm not sure what there would be like. What would the purpose be? I guess maybe like fashion choices for chairs across time.
It'd be like basically with any other science. It's like how does this thing function? What are the optimal ways that it could function? What ways are not optimal? So sort of like creatures that stand up and walk on two legs versus creatures that walk on four legs. There's studies of the construction and the effects of that construction.
But I mean, what other science, like we're talking about science, which is meant to be based on observation, not based on assigned characteristics.
Well, you do observations based on a particular category, like in the category.
But what's the observation what characteristic is like why is you've defined the backrest as an essential property of a chair, but the armrest as not an essential property of the chair? And what observation can you make to differentiate between them?
Some humans are 5 feet tall, some are 6 feet tall, some are 200 pounds, some are 300 pounds. Like these are just variances to the essential properties of what makes a human.
Okay, a rock that's in the shape of a bean that you sit in and it supports your back, is it a chair?
I mean, if you construct the rock into the chair, yeah.
You don't construct it, you just sit down on it.
I mean, you can use it as a chair, but
is a toilet a chair?
Yeah, there's another good one.
If you lean back on it, but I don't.
But again, you haven't defined why the backrest is important, but not the armrest.
I just explained that humans have variance, rocks have variance. We
So why? But we agree there's variance. But you said that
so
a backrest is intrinsic. No, hold on. Let me just finish.
Versus a natural construction matters none. The essential.
No, but you've said no. Hold on. Let me finish my
properties.
Let me finish my question. You've said that a backrest on a seat is an essential characteristic of a chair, but an armrest on a seat is not an essential characteristic of a chair.
Yes.
And how do you determine that the backrest is essential but not the armrest?
Well, how do we determine that a head is essential and not a ponytail?
Because it can exist without it.
There you go.
So stools can exist without backrests.
Yeah.
And people still sit on them.
Isn't the essential part of a chair that people sit on it?
Sorry, what?
Isn't the essential characteristic of a chair that people sit on it? How are we differentiating between one category and the other? Why are we differentiating between stools and chairs?
I mean, it's the same reason we look at the difference between a man and a woman. They're different.
So why are
They're
armrests
human,
not?
but they're
So
different.
why are not armrests not a different category than chairs? Why are chairs with armrests not a different category than chairs without armrests?
Because it's not seen as important enough.
Right.
Okay,
These are all
this is-
attributed. These are all social. These are all just subjective.
I mean,
And-
if
and
that's
science
the case,
isn't meant to be
then the same
subjective.
thing when you're looking at man and woman, it's like, well, who cares? There are things that vary. Who cares?
This is
Well,
probably
that's an
just a
interesting point
stupid
that
subject,
I
but
probably don't want to get to.
yeah, maybe I don't know. If I was to sort of take a science of chairs seriously, I think I would have to start with first getting a large enough and stable enough definition of what the essential natures to a chair might be. And I think that would have to be done through some sort of polling process of people to see whether or not the backside of a chair is an actual requirement, or if it's just something
But
an
just
individual scientist cares about.
Pause on that. Polling process. I agree with you, but why would we call that a science?
I mean,
why would we have a polling process? Because we don't have a polling process to figure out what we categorize a human as.
No, but you've said the only reason we call it a chair is that people say if it has a back, it's a chair. If it doesn't have a back,
I did
it's a
not
stool.
say that.
That's a polling
I did not say
process.
that.
you said it was a bit of observation from like what people prefer.
No, it's an observation of these things that actually exist.
Yeah, and the fact is, like, stools actually
some
exist.
People look at a chair and say, "Hey, that's a stool." And some people look at it and say, "Hey, that's a chair." No, that's just not the case. We look at the things that are common between these things. This is how we make a category. We look at the features that are.
So what about the armrests
across these things?
You're not dealing with the armrests. The armrests, I think, are pretty.
It's a variant.
They kill your argument, though.
It
Why is a
doesn't,
stool
because-
not a variant of a chair? Why is it completely different?
Why do we call bald people something other than whatever they are already? Like John has hair and you don't have hair, so why don't we just say something other than a man? We'll call you like something else.
All right,
right?
I think we probably have to move on this, but I think you're not I think you're basically saying that attributed properties are proper subject of science, and I think Vervaeke and I would probably disagree that it's not that we can't study them, we can't learn things about them, and we can't talk about them. He's not saying they're irrelevant. He's not saying they don't exist. He's not saying they're not important. He's just saying they're not the subject of science.
This is where I might raise up, because it seems as though his whole basis for meaning is somewhat attributive, where we have this structure for understanding the world that we have to kind of utilize in order to actually interact with the world. And this is not necessarily a accurate representation of the world, or something that we're directly experiencing correctly as a component to reality. It's something that we're imposing, in a way, onto reality just in order to make sense of it.
Okay, you're right, but this is where he brings in this analogy. And actually, did you get to that part of the analogy of the theory of evolution? Did you get that far?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so this is where he brings this in. And this is where this is the key. I think what you've just said is the key to why he says you can't have a theory of relevance, but you can have a theory of relevance realization. So he brings in the analogy of the theory of evolution. They said before Darwin, people thought that if you study the natural world, you could discover the essence of how things were designed. And what Darwin's big step forward was that there is no essential design. What you have is evolutionary fitness, the capacity to survive long enough to propagate the species. And then he talked about fittedness, which is about what it is about the organism that allows it to reproduce. So while there's no essential design, we can't have a theory of design there, but we can have a theory about how an organism is fits itself to the environment. That we can observe. That we can look at it. We can make predictions about. We can make we can observe the way organisms adapt to the environment. We can have a theory of the evolution of fittedness.
Right.
And
Yeah, that was kind of his point, that like fittedness doesn't have an essential nature to it either. It's rather like a process that life undergoes. And he's drawing a connection there for meaning. Like we don't have or relevancy. We don't have a essential description that we can place to everything that is relevant. Rather, it is sort of this open question, I guess, but we can still sort of understand it in the same way that we can sort of understand evolution by looking at the process of meaning making or relevance realization or becoming fit to the environment.
So we'd probably say we can't have a theory of meaning, but we can have a theory of meaning generation. We can have a theory of how humans generate meaning. And that's where he goes into these psychotechnologies, which lead to insight, which lead to relevance realization, which lead to all of this stuff. So we can have a science of how humans generate meaning, but we can't have a science of that is meaningful, because it may be meaningful to one person, but not meaningful to another person. But the process of generating meaning, the process of identifying things as meaning, we can have a science of that.
I don't know. I think you could definitely say this has meaning scientifically, because the meaning would be related to the thing that has the meaning. Like, for instance,
okay, so like you could say that dung, like dung from a buffalo, has a inherent fittedness, I suppose, to the dung beetle, because it helps it in its survival and its reproduction.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have any inherent fittedness to, I don't know, say the buffalo itself, because it's an excretion that it doesn't require. An unnecessary waste.
So if you know what is important to somebody, you can know what is meaningful to that person in relationship. Because if it's basically,
but the meaning is not an intrinsic
relevancy.
Right.
But you're talking about the process there.
If it matches the feature set, then it is therefore evaluatively meaningful to that person.
No, but look at what you just said. If you know this about a person, you can determine how they will generate meaning about that. It doesn't mean that the thing that they find meaningful, is intrinsically meaningful. It's that we can identify how this person will perceive that as meaningful.
Okay,
right.
But
so it's not like we could empirically look at the dung itself to determine, oh, this is fit for the dung beetle. It's only by observing, say, the dung beetle's interaction with the dung that we can get the connection there, I suppose.
I would say that, terms that relate to a specific subject or object necessarily will have that property taken into account when you talk about inherency or intrinsic. It is essentially, those properties are essentially important to the thing that that has that kind of importance one.
But it's not a property of the object, it's a property of the subject.
But the thing that is giving value to the subject does exist within the thing, like food.
Right, but
for
the
instance,
thing maybe
it has that value in it, regardless if
But the thing can be valuable to one person and completely valueless to somebody else.
Yes, I'm not disregarding that.
Which is what makes it differ from most processes of empirical science, where the properties of an object don't change depending upon who's looking at it.
Can't agree. Most things are relative to a system. For instance, is gasoline valuable to a process of cooking? No. Is gasoline valuable to a gas combustion engine? Yes. It is related to the system.
Well, you can also have a gas stove, but okay.
But the point is that things are, contextual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and so
you can have a study of science of how we analyze context, but the actual context itself isn't subject to science. Sorry?
Science already takes context into consideration. That's what I'm trying to point out here.
Yes, but I'm saying we cannot have a science of gas is useful to cooking. We can have a science of how people determine if gas is useful to cooking.
I mean, look, for quantum mechanics, is that useful in all of science? No, it is very contextual, right? All science must operate on contextualness.
No, I think the point that Brett and I are making is that for certain, like at least in regards to empirical sciences, the context that is the only context that is required is being able to observe it by itself. Like you don't need to observe it in relation to other things. And that's what we can get sort of the intrinsic properties to an object that and build a understanding of what the object is independent of how it makes how it's useful as a tool to other entities or how it's used in relation to other objects.
Most formulas have variables. Those variables are inherently telling you the context matters.
Oh, I just noticed Susan made a comment.
Oh.
You do know that there really was a Luca and that the whole theory of UCD, universal common descent, is in real trouble. You can just ignore my comment. Just had to pop that in. We did not ignore the comment. I read the comment and now I'm not, but.
Right. Yeah, it's that might be something else we can bring up because he mentioned something about evolution that I don't know. I'd have to look into it more so. But there was this book I had read, Mind and Cosmos, which made sort of I think panpsychist. Oh, well, actually, no. He didn't really make any exact conclusions. All he really presented was some certain problems in the way that we typically think about evolution. So the comment that Vervaeke made was evolution, while not being an intelligent process, produces intelligence from it. And there, like in certain ways, I understand what he's saying because, like, you can have the evolutionary sort of virtual engine through what is it, like for what Google does, where they make their kind of artificial intelligences. It goes through this sort of systematic variation, heritability, and then selection that goes on, and then you can get a artificial intelligence that is able to run around on obstacles and like make jumps and do things like that. It is very cool to see what they do, and that is a system of evolution taking place, and we're getting sort of intelligent responses to the environment that allow it to run. Now, so I do accept that can take place, and it could very well be the case that is what was necessary. That was all that was necessary for our own historical evolution. Now, the point though that I believe the author of the book Mind and Cosmos, what was making though was that in order for, and this is my harebrained attempt to really understand it because it was a complicated book and I don't know how much I actually got from it. At least the takeaway I had from it was that in order for a behavior to be indoctrinated into the organism itself, there would have to be some sort of subjective basis for which either a positive or a negative valence could be associated with the behavior or the effects of that behavior. What as to, valence? Huh?
What do you mean by valence?
Like a positive or negative reinforcement. So like a feeling, or like say you eat sugar, it tastes sweet. That makes you want to eat more sugar. Or if you eat something bitter, that tastes bad and you don't want to eat anything bitter. Something similar to that for in association with behaviors. Now, the way in which typically, say, like being the selfish gene, their understanding of like these sorts of behaviors can come about without having any sort of subjective basis behind them. Like that, it will like the responses from the environment to a behavior will lock in that behavior basically to the organism such that it will repeat that behavior again into the future, just simply by the fact that it has inherited it. Now, I don't think that works exactly, because if there is no subjective basis, and this is me very much kind of speculating here, if there is no subjective basis, there would be no method by which to associate a positive reinforcement of a behavior and any other behavior that it might have. So like say during an organism's life, it went left, it went right, it went forward, and going forward managed to get a little bit of calories that it can use to keep on moving forward or left backward. And then that thing has a kid and then it dies. Now, that new organism would have all the same, aside from variations and mutations, would have all the same sort of underlying substructures to go left, to go right, and to move forward. However, if there was some sort of subjective basis for this protozoa or whatever it is, then the moving forward and receiving some sort of caloric intake that allows it to continue to move, would be upregulated as a positive for that protozoa, such that it will emphasize that behavior in itself. And this is me sort of like speculating my own understanding of behaviorism in like training dogs and animals, and understanding evolution in regards to that. And this is why I'm actually somewhat speculatively accepting of the idea of panpsychism, because it seems to make sense that in order for these positive behaviors to be integrated into the organism itself, such that it can move forward and inherit those positive behaviors and let loose all the irrelevant behaviors like moving left and right, there would have to be some sort of subjective basis of continuity for the protozoa, just to know that, okay, moving forward works better than moving left or right.
So this kind of thing, the feature rollover kind of thing, generally, if the environment changes to where a previously negative trait was, useless, but now is useful and didn't get dropped off because that useless trait wasn't enough to get it killed, now will advance its position evolutionarily compared to the items that don't have this particular trait. This essentially, sickle cell is a really good example of this. It was a mutation, right? And this mutation, not super advantageous most of the time, but it wasn't enough to kill all of the people off that had this mutation. And so when the environment was such that everybody but that had that mutation would basically die off, that mutation was now seen as an advantage in comparison to the non-mutated blood cell form. So there's two different ways of selecting. There's you kill off the things that essentially the traits were disadvantageous, and the other one is you keep traits that are advantageous, and the things that are sort of in a neutral position sort of just hang out and wait, right? They're not advantageous, they're not disadvantageous, or they're not disadvantageous enough to get to harm the person.
And the point I'm making is that if our only selective mechanism is the environment itself, then all of the other, like we won't be able to know which behaviors were advantageous and which behaviors were disadvantageous. All of the behaviors will be upregulated for the next and for the next in the genealogy.
Wait, hold on, guys. Let me just because I think it's interesting what you guys are telling, but I'm missing the link.
Okay, yeah, okay. So Vervaeke said that evolution, while not being intelligent, manages to produce intelligence, and
so it's not circular. Is the point he was making?
Well, no. He was saying that was like a fact about evolution was the fact that it can produce an intelligent agent without having any sort of basis of intelligence. And I'm not so sure if panpsychism is true, there would have to be some, at least, semblance of intelligence. I agree that intelligence
hold on.
can build
Just
off
to
of
be
itself.
clear, what panpsychism holds is that everything is conscious. It does not necessarily hold that everything is intelligent.
Right. And I'm just meaning it like, in order to have a basis for intelligence to rise up, there would have to be some sort of subjectiveness in which positive and negative valences towards actions can be upheld, so that you can know, okay, doing this is wise or smart because it provides me with more food, and doing this other thing is dumb because it doesn't bring me more food.
I mean, it could also, I mean, a lot of these things can work on non-conscious processes too. I think,
Right. And that's like, I understand, like, from the Google example, there are non-conscious examples of variation, heritability, and selection taking place that can produce what appears to be intelligent solutions to problems. But I would say that even for that example, there is a higher amount of selection that is taking place than what we would find in nature. I just want to be
careful here. Like, he brought up the theory of evolution specifically as an analogy. Like, he called it an analogy. So I think we got to, not that it's not interesting and important what you're talking about, but I think it's getting beyond, like, I don't think he was saying that.
That was just one statement that he was making, and this was really probably the first time that I tried to articulate it as well, and I don't know, I have to, like I said, I need to do a lot more research.
And yeah, we could delve into that, but I think it's a different topic.
You're right.
From this, I don't want to poo-poo it.
No. I got my soapbox now. I'll step down.
Well, I think we covered. I just want to see. I'm going to just see my notes. I think we covered the main stuff. Like, he ends the lecture sort of with a hint of where he's going, but I think that's what the subject of the next two lectures are. And so I think for next week we should pair two. The next two, I think, pair together. And then the one after that, he moves on to other stuff.
Okay. I was just looking because, like,
to bring up today.
I don't think so. I went through pretty much all my notes that I wanted to bring up, and I think you got through a lot of yours. I think Concept had already left. Nicholas, do you want to say anything? I noticed that you unmuted your mic for a second while we were talking about the science of chairs. I don't know if you want to go back to that if you had something to add.
Not in particular. I was just going to play around with basically just how we go about categorizing things, and then imagining that the science that we then use to describe it is not based on there being an observer, right? Basically, to categorize it all, you need a subjective frame, and no matter what you may perceive as the intrinsic qualities as something else, your ability to organize those intrinsic qualities is actually what is producing a science. And so you can get into these really weird, kind of funky bits, right? You can almost be like, well, what is evolution? Is it just a subcategory of physics? Like, what intrinsic bit are you actually looking at, and why do we consider it something other than physics? And you can do that with any set of sciences. But it was more, it's...
Yeah, I wondered about that sometimes, because
necessary.
I think there's differing categories of sciences, and each of the sciences sort of have their sort of methodologies that they go through. They're different axioms or maxims or axioms that they work off to sort of build up their understandings of the very science that they're working in. But I'm not so sure how much the axioms are really shared across sciences, because I think there's some that are sort of like necessary to build up a science, say, of evolution. Like, you have to have an understanding of causality taking place. You have to have an understanding of random mutations taking place. different things like that. Different things that you have to sort of take as a given, which makes sense because that's what we're observing within the framework of evolution. That within other sciences, they're more open and free to not really regard those things as being necessary. So like then say cosmology, you can kind of play around with differing ideas of time or causality and things like that. And it's not so much, I don't know. I don't want to just completely throw out science, but I want to at least recognize where, and like I want to make sure I know when and where differing sciences do agree or don't agree with each other. And I don't think that's made clear so much because I don't know how much there's these interfaith dialogues going on between the sciences.
They largely do agree. There's basically only two main splits right there, which would be the normal titled science and, you know, like physics or biology. And then they have the separate categorization of theoretical physics, you know, so it's like, this is sort of a different space related to physics. You know, it's like we're not really entirely sure what's going on, but these are like some theories we're playing around with. You got same kind of thing in basically any of the other categories as a theoretical department. But I put this in the group chat. This is something that I talk to a lot of people about, this nesting thing. Like we've got chemistry inside physics, biology inside chemistry. You know, like we do this because there are particular features that are similar between these things. So like chemistry, it is all about elements and how these elements interact with each other. And before we sort of had like a general idea of what that looked like. And then when we really got down into it and we figured out, oh, well, there's protons, electrons, neutrons, what you can distill it down even further, which is how do molecules interact in terms of their electrons, right? It has nothing to do with the core, right? When you're talking about like the core of the molecular stuff, then you're into an area of physics, a very particular area of physics.
Right. So I guess a test that you could have to make sure that there is this correlation between the nestings is, say, like within, like if there was be a way in which to describe, say, I don't know, some sort of anatomical truth about human, the way our bodies work, all the way down to the physics level of like the atoms and molecules interacting with each other. Like if there was some sort of translation method between, okay, I've got this physical description, mathematical formula for how the heart beats, and I have it all sort of laid out in its physics base, and then I can work my way up from there and like have the same formula, or it's not the same formula, but like the same meaning or whatever, just translated between each of these differing fields. That would at least be to me a relief and maybe a bit of a disappointment in finding out that they do have this direct correlation between each other.
You can see a similar concept more readily within computer coding. I linked an image that you can see in group chat here.
It makes sense, at least for computer coding, because that is exactly like you, in order to build up coding, it has to have some sort of direct correlation to the material underneath it.
Yeah, so we have the hardware, and then we got machine language on top of that, which is like, I think that's just zeros and ones. Then we got assembly language, which is on top of machine. Then we have high-level language. Then we have things like C. And then on top of that is stuff like visual programming. So it's the same kind of idea, is that the reason why we use visual programming language is because it's simple, right? And we just let the software deal with the translation down to the zeros and ones. The idea of compiling code, that's what they're trying to say, is you write all this stuff out with, human language, and then you compile, and it dumps it all into zeros and ones. Sometimes the compilers just do it into a lower level language, and then it's compiled further later, but most of the time it's just done into zeros and ones from, a human language, right? Like C++, you can read it, right? It's confusing, but you can read it. You're not poking in a bunch of zeros and ones. You let the software do that translation. And so you could explain chemistry with physics language. It would just be extraordinarily inefficient. It'd just be nonsense.
Yeah, but I think the point that I was bringing up was the fact that within certain of these fields, there are necessary axioms that they're taking just in order to sort of build up a foundation for what their science is, that within other fields are not necessary and are sometimes even left out of the equation or disregarded.
Do you have any examples?
Just the one that I sort of brought up with evolution sort of requiring causation and random mutations taking place. I'd have to think about it more because it is late.
Now, I know before we go, Nick, you had said at the beginning, I think you didn't want to jump ahead, but you had said there's some things that you disagreed with Vervaeke on, but I think you wanted to wait a bit. Did you want to bring them up now?
I mean, it largely revolves around kind of this weird category conversation that was taking place for a good chunk of the video, but it just eventually seems like there is a type of I might save it for when it comes back up at a different time because I feel like it would take a while to actually unpack it and then
you want to preview it now and then we could I think we're still in this realm next week if with the last two, like we're still with relevance realization next week.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll try and bring it up then. I'm a little fuzzy today, so I'm not not been partaking in the conversation very much. But
thanks for joining us, and also thanks to Concept Hut and Pleasure of Doubt and myself.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Maybe in a private conversation or something, but I just want to make a note of it here. Beaver dams, bird nests, things that are made by agents that aren't, natural chemical processes do exist, and science does categorize and do study, things that creatures do make, right? And I find that no different than a human making something, because a human is just an agent as well, so
that's kind of a good point. Like if we're not accepting chairs as something that we're building up under science, why are we accepting other people? Because those are also produced by people.
Well, no, beaver dams and bird nests, these are things made by creatures, agents.
Yeah.
Right, but we wouldn't have to bring it back. We wouldn't have a study of what is a bird's nest. We would have a study of how do birds make nests.
I don't see really a big difference, because they can classify what a bird nest, what bird nests belong to which creatures, what the construction is, how it goes together.
Classification is kind of arbitrary, but what they're actually doing, is what we observe, right?
Is classifications of different, in terms of taxonomy of different animals, arbitrary?
I think it is, and I think it is arbitrary, and I think most scientists would agree. I don't think taxonomy is a science. I think they recognize it's arbitrary, but we need to, just like we talked about in terms of just reading in things, or we need to categorize.
These categories are homogeneous, stable, and inherent to
but like for example, with evolution, like the moment you choose to note speciation is arbitrary. The parent of because we
why is it arbitrary?
Because we pick
it's homogeneous, stable, and inherent.
Because the first of a species is always going to be the same species as its parent, right? But we pick a time to say, okay, we're differentiating the species here between this species and that species, but it's a continuum. And where we draw the line is still arbitrary.
Yeah, there's no like essential definition that you can place to what is or what is not a species, because like there's certain things that you could say it's where they're unable to breed with the opposing party, but there are other speciations within like things that don't actually breed, like they actually generate from themselves. I can't think of the term right now. That would still be at least commonly understood as being of a different species, but has nothing to do with the fact that it can or cannot breed with.
But the reason we do this is not because it's a science, but it helps us do science. It helps us talk about things. It helps us. So it helps us do the scientific work. I don't think taxonomy itself is a science. It's very important because without it, it'd be very hard to do science. We have to group things, right? We have to talk about these things.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, even if I grant this, I'm still saying that in these categories, we apply science to those categories. So arbitrary or not, we still find these things to be homogeneous, stable, and intrinsic enough that we do a science study on that category. So artificial or natural should not matter.
But no one's brought up artificial or natural. I don't know why.
That's the whole.
but no, what I'm
You're the one saying it just shouldn't matter.
I agree. It's
Artificial agent created, natural. Nature created it. Natural processes, not an agent made it. So
I don't. But we haven't been
evolution or an agent that creates a thing that now has got a category.
But I don't think anyone here is, including Vervaeke, has suggested otherwise.
But that is what our contention has been.
No, it's Vervaeke. No, because the process of meaning generation, the process of relevance realization is human generated. He thinks there can be a science of it. Psychology, human like he's not talking about it not being human or not being. He's not talking about the difference between human and not human. That relevance realization is a human process as he's talking about it. I think
we got our wires crossed. I don't.
What? I think next week, he's going to bring this part home because I think he's really going to be, from what I'm gathering, he's really going to be presenting his theory of relevance realization in the next two lectures.
All right, great. We'll meet up next week for that. Sorry for everybody that we're doing this so late and not doing it on the normal days, but I think next week we should be back on schedule. So hopefully I'll see all of you then. Have a good rest of your week, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone.
Oh shoot, I need to go to the live control room. Sorry. And image. There we go. In stream.